Hello and welcome to the readings panel. I'm Jess Faraday, and we each have a 5-minute reading to do from our upcoming work. And I'm going to ask all of the authors please to mute yourself and stop your video unless it is your turn to read, so that the person doing the reading can have the full attention. And I'm going to go in the order of that it was on the poster. Also, if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A. There's a little button at the bottom. You can ask a question and we'll save all the questions till the end so that everyone can get a chance to read in an uninterrupted fashion. So I'd like to start with Aimée, please, and let's turn it over to you.
Okay, I didn't know I was starting. Well, good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon if you're with me in France. Maybe some of you are. So I'm going to read from my latest novel, Always Believe. And I've chosen the chapter 7 because I've already read from the beginning. So let's go with chapter 7. Angela resigned herself to another sleepless night and reached for her e-reader. If she hadn't been at home, she would have taken a little white pill and gone to the land of Nod in a jiffy. But she was sleeping in the guest bedroom in the school boarding house. The house mistress had had a family emergency, and as head, she was the obvious replacement for the weekend. Some of the boarders had gone home, but most of them were, she hoped, safely tucked in their rooms for the night. St. Hilda's was supposed to be the first step into the sixth formers' independent lives. After all, in a year, they would go to university. Every year had its share of troublemakers, but so far, this year had been remarkably quiet, apart, of course, from her own personal tragedy. Nevertheless, Angela couldn't settle, and not only because she was in a strange bed in an impersonal room. She had even decided to stay half-dressed in case she was needed in the night. The black yoga pants and black sweatshirts were a far cry from her usual business suits, but at least they weren't pajamas. She was finally dozing when a frantic knock at her door jolted her awake. She glanced at the bedside clock, nearly 3 in the morning. Miss Ellingham, could you come quickly, please? It's Julie. She's not okay. Even though the girl was obviously trying to appear in control, Angela could hear her fear, and it made her anxious. Was this how the head of Sybil's school had felt that day, when she had found her daughter unconscious? Had Miss Woodford had the same sense of foreboding? She couldn't fall to pieces anyway. She had to remain strong in the front of the students, and her gut could be completely wrong. Julie and her roommate Megan, who'd come to knock at her door, were both high achievers, and not usually the kind to get in trouble. Angela hurried after Megan, with all the worst-case scenario churning in her head. Her first glance at Julie told her that she was at least still alive, which was good. She was also apparently having fits and sweating heavily, which wasn't so good. Angela came closer and laid her hand on the girl's forehead, burning hot. She glared at Megan. What happened? I don't know. She fell asleep and then she woke up and she said she was seeing strange things like lights and things and... Right, I get it. And what happened before that? Nothing, I swear, nothing. Angela gave the girl a withering look. Don't take me for a fool, Megan. I wasn't born yesterday. What did she take? Not born yesterday, but not so old that she couldn't remember her university days either. When she and her friends had experimented with pretty much everything, especially the cheaper things, since none of them had been rolling in money, like cheap booze, Malibu and Coke, White Lightning, good ways to get drunk pretty quickly, or LSD, or ecstasy. But even with that limited experience, she could recognize someone who was obviously coming down from a high, and coming down badly. She had to find a solution. She couldn't bear it if anything happened to the girl. Should she call the paramedics and get her to the hospital, or was there a better way? Julie appeared semi-conscious, but the convulsions had stopped, and she seemed quieter. What did she take? Angela repeated. Not sure. I think she came back with some pills and, right, don't move. Stay with her. I'm going to get the doctor. Try to make her drink some water. I'll be right back. Angela hurried to her office and riffled through her drawers to find the number of a school medical officer. She rang the number on the list. The doctor probably wouldn't answer her phone, and Angela would have to fall back on her first plan, paramedics. The phone rang a few times before a sleepy voice answered. Grayson Walsden's, what is it? Doctor, it's Miss Arlingham, St. Hilda's headmistress. I'm really sorry for waking you up, but I'm really, one of my students is, I need your help, doctor. What's the issue? The doctor's tone was sharp, and Angela took a deep breath. I think it's drugs. Look, could you just come, please? I think it's better if she was seen by a professional. Oh, right. So I've got to come just to make you feel better. Is that it? Or would it help your student as well? Angela sighed. Never mind. I'm sorry I woke you up. I'll just call an ambulance and take her to the hospital. I'll be there in 10. The doctor hung up abruptly, and Angela stared at the phone in her hand for a minute. There had been something in the voice, brusque, but also authoritative and kind of reassuring. Angela hurried back to Julie's room and saw with relief that although the girl was still very sweaty, she had also regained consciousness and looked quite sheepish. After telling the two girls that the doctor was coming, she went to the door to look for her. About 10 minutes later, a Mazda screeched on the gravel in front of the school, and Dr. Walsden alighted from the sports car. She reached on the passenger seat for a black leather bag and strode toward Angela. Thank you for coming, doctor. Just doing my job, replied the doctor curtly. Grayson wasn't in the best of moods. She had sort of assumed that in a civilian and non-hospital job, she would get to sleep full nights. But the replacement job had come with that caveat. She had to be available for emergency visits to the school. She wouldn't have minded if one of the students had come down with a real medical issue, like appendicitis or meningitis or whatever. A teenager experimenting with drugs, well, either she had overdosed, in which case her life was in danger and had committed a serious error of judgment, not calling an ambulance, or she was just feeling a bit rough, and there wasn't much she could do about it, and it made her angry. Although as a doctor, she shouldn't judge. And she had been hoping, preparing for a new career, had helped her correct that in her nature, but obviously it hadn't, not enough. She knew she had been barely polite to Angela Arlingham. Only the new good manners drilled into her teen childhood and her innate gallantry prevented her from being actively rude to the headmistress. She couldn't help noticing that even in her rumpled clothes and with tight eyes, the woman was extremely attractive. Petite, not quite slim, nor plump, just right, in fact, with wide blue eyes staring at her like she was the new messiah. She remembered the conversation she had had with her during her first visit to the school. Angela had seemed tired then, too. Of course, it was to be expected. The death of her daughter must still be fresh in her mind. Right. I think I've done my 5 minutes, so I don't know whose turn is it? Is it Justine?
Thank you very much. And that is Always Believe, and you can see that it is on sale now in the chat. There is a link, a buy link in the chat if anyone would like to read more of that story. And next I'd like to go to Eden.
Hello. So I'm reading from my new book, which is out in August. It's called Quiet Village. It's about a young girl whose mother is murdered. Her aunt takes guardianship of her and they move to the country. And it's probably not the best idea they ever had because there's something lurking in the woods watching them. So this is from partway through the book. So Collie is the aunt and Lana is the little girl. Collie put the DVD back in its case and switched off the TV. Lana had taken herself off to bed. Collie said she'd look in on her, not knowing if Lana was too old for that now or not. Either way, she hadn't said anything, not that she would. Collie got the impression Lana was on her best behaviour. Aside from the grief, there was a stiffness and formality that hadn't been there before. Collie hoped it would go away. The last thing Lana needed was the stress of being on her best behaviour on top of everything else she was going through. Collie thought she'd call Tony in the morning and see what he thought. As she switched out the light in the living room, she heard a scream, then the sound of a dog barking ferociously. What the bloody hell was that? It sounded like it came from the front of the house. Collie remembered there was one other house on their drive, positioned up a small drive of its own. Should she go and check or just call the police? Ordinarily, she wouldn't hesitate to go and look, but she had Lana to worry about now. Collie, what was that noise? Collie turned to see Lana on the stairs, looking worried. I don't know. Listen, I'm going to go and see. Keep the door locked and don't come out, all right? Collie said. Lana nodded. Collie was very aware of the thing earlier that had marked the door. Was this part 2 of that, or was there someone genuinely in trouble? Of course, it might be nothing at all. The amount of times in London she'd been ready to dial the police when she heard screaming and it turned out to be drunk people walking home. This wasn't London, though. Collie stepped outside into the night. She breathed in deep and started walking up the path. You couldn't see the other house from this angle. It was totally obscured by trees. Collie strained her ears to listen for any other sounds. Nothing. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Collie used the light from her phone to guide her away. There were no lights down here at all, and the moon was just a sliver in the sky. She started up her neighbour's small drive, and as she came around the bend, she saw lights blazing in the downstairs window, and the front door was wide open. Collie started to call out when something hit her from behind. Lana peeked through the curtains in her bedroom. Her window looked out onto the driveway, and she saw Collie and her torch bobbing their way up the path before she disappeared up the neighbour's drive. Was this to do with whatever had banged into their door this morning? Lana thought the thing in the bushes on the drive was just her imagination, but what if it was real? What if there really was something lurking in there? But that wasn't possible, was it? How many times had her mum told her there was no such thing as monsters? So many times that Lana believed it. What if her mum was wrong? Lana had been getting into bed when she heard the screams. She was used to hearing things like that in London, idiots being noisy because they were drunk or just messing about. But out here it was strange. Everything was so quiet, and at night all you could hear were owls and foxes, the night animals. Lana waited for the light from Collie's phone to reappear. Why did she go and look? Why didn't she just call the police? After Mum died, when Lana found out, someone put a picture online as the dead woman's daughter. She'd been desperate to get away, go somewhere nobody knew her. Collie suggested the country and she jumped at it. Now she was beginning to wonder if she'd made the right decision. She missed her house, she missed her friends, and she missed her life. Who let a 10-year-old make decisions anyway? Collie did. Lana could have asked for a pony and Collie would have got her one. Lana carried on staring out the window. Where was Collie? Out of the corner of her eye, Lana saw something move. She cried out and jumped back from the window. Collie's out there with it. Lana ran downstairs and grabbed a knife from the kitchen cupboard. It was as long as her arm, but it still felt useless and weak. She may as well have been holding a banana. Only Silver will stop that thing, and it was a ridiculous thought. It wasn't a werewolf. Those things were make-believe. All the same, Lana reached back into the drawer and pulled out an ornate cake knife. Collie only used it for special occasions like cutting birthday cake. She said it belonged to Collie's mother and was made out of pure silver. Lana wasn't sure if Collie was just winding her up as usual, but it wouldn't hurt to take it just in case. Lana stepped out onto the garden path. She'd forgotten to put on shoes, but at least she had 2 knives. She felt stupid and small and useless. But she wasn't going to let that thing get Collie. She hadn't been able to help her mother, but she wasn't going to lose her aunt as well without at least trying to help her. Lana made her way cautiously up the path. The gravel chips were rough beneath her feet, but at least the ground was dry. Her attention was fixed on the bushes and on trying not to run back into the house. Her heart hammered in her chest and the cold night air made her cheeks sting. Nevertheless, she kept on. She got to the gate. Suddenly, from her left came a loud rustling. Something was coming. Lana widened her stance and held the knives up ready for whatever came out and tried desperately not to be afraid. She felt something move up behind her and almost bolted, but just as quickly realised that whatever it was behind her wasn't it. Was it Collie? She didn't dare turn to look, but Collie would have said something. Whatever it was, it gave Lana confidence and made her feel almost protected. It was good. She planted her feet and prepared to face the thing in the bushes. That's it.
Wow. Wow, I can't wait to read that.
Thank you.
All right, Lesley, you're up.
One second. Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is a reading from In the Spotlight that is out now. It's the sequel to Starstruck. Just to set up this scene, we've got Eris and Cole are filming in London, and somebody's come to give them an interview. And this is where you get to meet a lady who's going to help them with their story. Donatella didn't film the interview, but her phone was recording everything they were saying. Cole was very conscious of it, but grateful that, so far, all the questions were about the movie. Eris had made sure that Cole answered what she wanted to before giving her own answers, and it made for a very enjoyable, informal chat to publicise their movie. Eris, you're best known for Code Red. How difficult has it been switching from the high-tech, fast-paced, all guns blazing of DC to the cobbled streets of Victoria, London? Eris patted at her dress. Well, the costumes are hugely different for a start. I don't think my government agent would have lasted long trying to run in these skirts. It's been a nice change of pace, and I've never done period drama before, so this has been an exciting. And Cole, it was a shock to your fans when it was announced you'd be leaving Fortune's Rise after this season. Cole tried not to stiffen and fought not to let her smile falter. This movie was too good an opportunity to miss. I'll miss working on the show, but I felt it was time to move on. Donatella stared at her. There's a rumour. Cole cut her off smoothly. You're way too professional to listen to rumours, Donatella. She watched Donatella hesitate for a moment, then reach over to turn off the recorder. You're probably aware that Maria Ramos's husband has been receiving threatening tweets. I'd rather not comment. Cole saw Eris move a little closer to her, ready to spring into action. I don't need you to confirm or deny anything, Cole. I'm not publishing anything said now. It's all off the record. And I promise you, I wouldn't gossip about things like this. The show garnered some very ardent fans for you and Maria. Refraction has been getting some very nasty messages ourselves from those kinds of fans, because we won't champion the rally to get you back in the show so that they can get their supposed end game. Cole winced. I'm sorry you all got caught up in that. It was never going to happen. It wasn't the direction the show wanted to take. Oh, my bosses told them quite bluntly that since Chris and Nat had never been written or played as a canon couple on the show, then our stance was that the relationship the fans were adamant to see should be best left to fan fiction and their own imaginations. Donatella sighed. Just like your own bosses did when it became clear a certain part of the fandom was going to be very vocal about a ship that was never written to sail in the first place. Cole sucked in a breath. I bet that generated some hate on your site. Donatella nodded. Which is why I am warning you off the record about what I have seen. Some of the fans, that select few in every fandom, aren't happy that Chris and Nat aren't lesbians. They feel they were baited. You can't bait if the hook is empty, Cole said. We were just two straight women who were neighbours, who sometimes argued about stuff when we saw each other. Our scenes caused sparks, but we weren't a slow burn romance, on or off the screen. Donatella nodded. Fandom has changed over the years. People aren't just satisfied with the characters they get on the screen. They readily pair off anyone and everyone now, however ridiculous the pairing is, and demand that it gets airtime. But the hate we got on the site for not shipping your characters was immense. I don't know if any of what happened concerning them is why you left the show, and I certainly won't mention it in my post to add fuel to their fire. But I need to warn you, as an admirer of your work and your talent, judging by the hate mail we got and what we're seeing on fan boards, you have some crazy fans who will go to any lengths to get their happy ending. Eris leaned into Cole and placed her hand on her knee. Cole couldn't do anything more than just nod her thanks to Donatella. Her message delivered, Donatella took a deep breath and reached over to turn the recorder back on. Now, I have to know, have you gone off set in your costumes like the guys from the Marvel universe do? And if so, were the British public too polite to say anything to you? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That sounds wonderful. I can't wait to read it. All right, we have Cathy next.
Hi everyone. I'm going to be doing a reading from my debut novel, Beulah Lodge, which is set in 19th century England in Yorkshire, to be precise. I wonder that you can be so calm, I said. About what? Eliza asked without looking up. Oh, Eliza, I burst out in frustration. You know perfectly well what. She looked up at me then, and her face told me that she did indeed know. She paused while she finished rolling her cigarette, and then she patted the bench beside her. Here, she said, come and take the weight off. Looks like you've been out for a good old tramp. I looked at my boots, which were coated with mud, and then I looked at the spot beside Eliza. My better judgment told me to simply leave, that spending any time alone in Eliza's company was dangerous. But I did not heed my better judgment and sat down next to her. Eliza perched a cigarette between her lips and took a book of matches from her pocket. She struck one and lit the cigarette, inhaling deeply. Then she held it out to me. Light some? She asked. I find it helps when you're trying to have a think about something. I looked at the cigarette for a long moment. Almost everyone I could think of in my life would be horrified at the idea of a lady smoking. My father, Beatrice, and most certainly Daniel. I took it from Eliza's fingers. You breathe it into your mouth and then into your chest, Eliza said. I did as she said and coughed violently as the acrid smoke hit my lungs. My eyes were watering as I passed it back to a laughing Eliza. That is truly foul, I said when I'd regained my breath. Yes, Eliza admitted, looking at the glowing tip before taking a deep drag. She blew the smoke out in front of her in a long sigh. But it gets to be very soothing. It was one of the few pleasures me and the other girls had. She tapped the ash from the cigarette into the grate of the range and settled back into the bench. I looked at her profile, the smooth lines of her cheek and jaw. I thought about what her life must have been like in London, and my own fretting over what had occurred between us seemed suddenly petty and unimportant. Eliza, I began slowly, I cannot be as calm as you about what happened. You talking about when I kissed you? Eliza blew smoke out in front of her languidly. Yes, I said, my face growing hot. I should not have allowed it to happen. It was very wrong, and I hope you can understand. Eliza looked at me thoughtfully for a moment and then said, all right, I know it was a bit, what's the word, impulsive. I didn't mean to upset you. I only did it because, well, why do people usually kiss each other? I could not even begin to contemplate the answer to this question, so I said hurriedly, just as long as you understand that it was a mistake and must never happen again. Don't matter either way. Soon enough, you'll be in India and I'll be stuck here. We were silent for a moment as the pot simmered on the range. The kitchen was darkening as the afternoon drew in, the low light from the oven casting an orange glow across the floor. Yes, I said, that is very true. It had been a while since I had thought about where my future lay. I was aware of Eliza's eyes on me as she asked, are you looking forward to your new life? She said it gently, and when I looked up at her, her eyes were full of kindness. I felt a sudden lump in my throat as I realised that I had missed kindness since Papa had died. I don't want to go, I said, the words coming out in a sudden rush. To India. I don't want to go. Why not? I struggled to explain it. It's as if my inner self, is it about being a missionary? Do you think God don't want you to go? I do not know what God wants from me. Before, when I prayed, I used to feel his presence surround me like I was standing beneath a vast willow tree. But since my engagement, I cannot find him. I had voiced something that I had not even fully expressed to myself. And your fiancé? Eliza asked. He is a good man. Eliza didn't reply immediately, but took another drag of her almost extinguished cigarette. I've met a lot of good men. Most of the blokes who came to see us girls on the streets was good men, fine, upstanding gentlemen. That's what the world thought of them. But how a man is in public and how he is in private, she shook her head. They was never good to us. She stubbed out her cigarette on the side of the range. Yes, I whispered. I fear that Daniel, well, he does not respect me. He wishes me always to be something I'm not. And that's why you don't want to go to India. I nodded miserably, fighting the tears that were pricking at my eyes. So tell him you don't want to go. I shook my head. I've given him my promise to be and to go wherever he goes. I cannot go back on that. Eliza took my hand in her own. Her grip was firm. Well, you ain't there yet. You're still here, aren't you? Yes, I said, I'm still here. I looked at Eliza's face, knowing that at some point in the future, I would be in India with Daniel and would be remembering her face and how it looked at this moment. My eyes dropped to her lips, which parted slightly. One day, I thought, I will be far away from here, and I will be unhappy. The certainty of my future misery made the present seem of no account. I leaned forward and pressed my lips tentatively against Eliza's.
Wow, beautiful section and beautifully read. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, remember, attendees, if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A and we will answer them afterward. Next up, we have Amanda, please.
Thanks very much, Jess. So I'm going to be reading from Under Her Influence, which is available now through Bolster Books. It's a story about Gemma Johnson, who is a travel vlogger, an influencer, and a lover of all things to do with theme parks. And in this book, she meets Beth Fraser, who is the owner of the popular Fraser Resort Park located in Scotland. Gemma got into the queue, appreciating the theming of woodland creatures and fairies as she went. The continuous nature of the ride meant that in no time at all, she was in the front of the queue and informing the costume team member that she was a party of one and would like a front row seat if at all possible. Gemma had rarely encountered a member of staff not happy to meet her requests. A little kindness went a long way, especially when someone was working hard to ensure guests were having a good time. Gemma had never really had a job like that, or anything that can be considered a real job at all. Realised that money could be made passive work she had already done. Rather than attending a place of work and being paid per hour, she could be paid for something she created again and again, as long as people wished to consume whatever it was she had made. By 16, her dad had allowed her onto the scary world of YouTube. It wasn't long after that she received her first payment, $3 and change. When she converted it into pounds, it sounded even worse than it had done in dollars. But Gemma was excited and she had the social media bug. She'd produced some terrible videos at the start, but someone somewhere in the world had watched them. Now she was a success and knew she was very lucky to live the life she did. She boarded the boat-like vehicle, unlocked her phone and started to play with the settings. "Excuse me," an imperious voice bellowed from the dockside. Gemma looked up. "Yes?" The woman wasn't in a themed costume and she didn't look like a guest either. She was dressed in a trouser suit and looked completely out of place for the ride and the whole park. Despite her firm tone, Gemma couldn't help but be transfixed by the beautiful woman staring down at her. "You can't film here," the woman told her in a harsh whisper so the other guests couldn't hear. "Oh, I have permission from the owner," Gemma explained. She flashed a smile and hoped that would smooth over any misunderstanding. "Oh, really?" The woman sounded unconvinced. "Yes, I spoke with him this afternoon. Cameron Fraser? I'm Gemma Johnson. I'm touring the park." Gemma couldn't remember a time when she'd ever had to explain her presence at a theme park. The customer was always right and no one wanted to create a scene, but this woman seemed to have not read that memo and looked to be seething at Gemma's words. In Gemma's opinion, that just made her all the more attractive. "Launch the boat," the woman commanded to one of the staff before turning sharply on her heel and marching through the door to the backstage area. A friendly-looking member of staff, dressed as a fairy, looked down at her. "Go ahead and film, it's fine," she said. The boat was launched, trundled along a large rubber conveyor belt before splashing down lightly into the water and starting to bob along. The theming was beautiful, the music boomed through hidden speakers, but Gemma couldn't help but wonder who the woman had been. If she worked for the park, as indicated by her disappearance through a backstage door, then she assumed she'd find out soon enough. Gemma smiled to herself. She was looking forward to that. Beth marched across the car park towards her brother's car. She'd only just managed to catch up with him before he took the children home. "Who the hell is Gemma Johnson?" Beth demanded when he was in earshot. The children were in the back of the car, headphones on and phones in hand and completely unaware of her presence. Cameron was unplugging the charging cable from his vehicle. "Oh, damn, I forgot," he said, looking genuinely apologetic. "Who is she?" Beth pressed. "She's an influencer," Cameron explained. He leaned back on the vehicle and looked at her. "I'm sorry, I completely forgot to tell you that I'd invited her to stay." "What on earth is an influencer?" Beth asked. Cameron rolled his eyes in the same way he did when she asked who a singer was or who an actor was. "It's someone on social media with a large following, you know, like Instagram, which is a social media site for photos and videos." "I know what Instagram is," Beth complained. It was half true. She'd heard of Instagram, but she wasn't entirely sure what it was. Beth didn't really use any social media at all. She had a Facebook account, but had long ago forgotten her password. Twitter seemed to be the realm of celebrities and politicians, which sounded like zero fun. And all in all, she didn't have time to be documenting her lunch online for people to see and comment on, nor did she see the point. Well, she has a YouTube channel and an Instagram channel, both called Life with Gem. She travels the world and records what she sees, does, eats, that kind of thing. Beth blinked. "And people watch that?" Cameron laughed. "They really do." She stayed at a certain American theme park whose name we do not speak. And within 3 days of uploading a hotel tour, she was staying on site, she'd racked up over 250,000 views. Even if you assume that some people watch it twice, that's still over 200,000 individual views in just 3 days. But it doesn't just happen when she goes to the place we never speak of. She went on all of the roller coasters at a park in Sweden and got over 300,000 views. She went to Japan when a park there was opening a new ride, recorded her experience and got 500,000 views. Her channel is closing in on 1 million subscribers. Beth had to admit she was impressed that Cameron had done his research. The kids love her and watch her channel all the time, or her Insta stories. Beth held up her hand. She was only just discovering what a channel was. She didn't need to know what a story was. That seemed like running before she could walk. So you've invited her to stay? Beth asked, trying to get a grip on how this influencer thing worked. Yep, she's hosted. That's internet speak for we pay for her to stay. She'll tell her viewers that she's hosted, and they'll know that we've asked her to come and stay and comped something. In this case, she's at the hall for a week with entrance to the park and the nature reserve. Beth shook her head to refocus on the point at hand. Clearly she had a lot to learn about this new visitor, but she would have preferred to have done so before she arrived. Why am I only just finding out about this now? She demanded. Cameron looked contrite. I'm sorry, really, I didn't even think about it. I asked her on a whim and she said yes. I booked everything in, completely forgot all about it. It was only when my phone notification came in that I remembered her arriving today. Beth pinched the bridge of her nose. Could you possibly, when you're scheduling the notification for something, schedule a second one to tell me whatever it is you're off doing on your own? Cameron nodded quickly. Absolutely, I'll do my best. She looked at her watch and realised she would be running late for a meeting. I have to go. She turned and hurried back to the park offices. She needed to prepare for a meeting that was starting in 10 minutes, deal with Cameron's voucher mess from earlier, make time to call her niece before bed, and figure out what on earth an influencer was. Anyone who thought that running a theme park would be non-stop fun really had no idea.
That was fabulous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Justine?
Oh no, can you hear me? It says unable to start video.
I can hear you. We can hear you.
But I can't seem to start video. I'm
Okay.
unable
There.
to start video. Can you bring me in?
Oh, I'm trying. Okay.
Okay, I'll start my video.
There. Yay.
Okay. Okay. Well, I first want to say that those readings were lovely, and I can't compete with them because I don't have the lovely British accent. It's much less fun to listen to an American accent. So I'm just going to talk instead of read. So
Right.
If I may, and I'll try to keep an eye on the time with it. The novel that I'm hoping to promote is called To Sleep with Reindeer. And it's one of my last 7 novels about World War II. I write with great authority about the war because I lived in Germany. I speak German. I have a degree in German studies. So, and the war interests me a great deal. So I've written about World War II from inside of Germany, what it's like to be gay during the Third Reich. I've written about the French and Belgian resistance, about the Eastern Front with female Soviet pilots and female snipers, the famous Witches of Stalingrad. And I've written about Berlin during the blockade and airlift in 1948. And then I made a trip to Lapland with a friend, Finnish Lapland, and was fascinated, first of all, by life in deep, deep snow, and also by the Sami, the Laplanders, they call themselves Sami. And so I decided that the next place that the next focus of my writing about World War II would be the Norwegian front. In fact, Norway plays a role in World War II, primarily because of its ports, but also because of its heavy water program in the hydroelectric plant at Vemork. There's even a movie made about it called Heroes of Telemark, if you like seeing Kirk Douglas playing a Norwegian. But the program in Vemork was to create heavy water so that they could study the effects of fission for the creation of a bomb, they being the Nazis who took over the plant. And the Allies, of course, wanted to stop that. This is all historical. They planned mission after mission. The first mission was a catastrophe in which everyone was killed. The second mission succeeded temporarily, and the third mission succeeded permanently, but at the cost of many lives. So I add to these three tales my two female characters, an English woman and a Sami woman. And we have the English one going over on a secret mission, and it was in fact a secret mission. And she is one of those that crash in Norway, except contrary to history, she survives, but barely, and she's rescued by the Sami woman. So after spending some time with the Sami people, which is fascinating in itself, and living in deep snow, she is able to reintegrate with the British effort to stop the production of heavy water at this plant. So she and the Sami woman join forces, and they proceed to go to the next phase, which is to invade the hydroelectric plant. This is also historical, with great difficulty, and but with no loss of life on either side. And they succeeded in shutting down the plant, or at least the production of heavy water. The problem arises, and the romance continues, in case you're concerned about that. But when things seem to be going well, it turns out that it was only a temporary solution, because the Nazi scientists, the evil scientists, who in fact were Norwegians, were able to start up production again. So they had to do plan 3, which was to sink a ferry transporting the heavy water to ships to go to Germany, and they are involved in that. So the novel deals with 3 historical events with as much historical detail as I was able to muster, but with the inclusion of these 2 women and lots of snow. So that being the case, I hope you will be interested in reading To Sleep with Reindeer. Oh, there's lots of reindeer too, and reindeer are actually slept with. So that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. I can't wait to read it. I have read all of your other books and enjoyed them very much, and I'm looking forward to this one too. All right, I guess there is nobody left but me, so I will read my little bit. Let's see if I can start my video, please. This is from, okay, start my video, yay. Okay, this is the opening from my upcoming book, The Fiend in the Fog. It's a novel of historical suspense and monsters, and it is set in London on the East End in 1895. There she comes, Bert said, just like I told you. Garrick leaned his shoulder against the blackened bricks of the burnt-out sugar factory. Deep shadows between the factory and the warehouse beside it made the alley the perfect place for the boys to watch the street without being seen. I'll be damned, Garrick said. Not that Bert's prediction surprised him. Bert didn't say a lot, but he saw everything. Garrick followed the other boy's gaze down the street to a woman in her mid-20s rounding the corner. Dull gray dress, brown hair pulled back beneath a plain dark woolen hat that was probably secondhand, heavy flat-soled shoes, scrubbed face, earnest expression. Nice coat, though. Garrick rubbed a thumb over the hilt of the knife in his jacket pocket. He could get a proper sum for a coat like that. Been walking past here once a week, every week for the past few weeks. Same time, always alone. Ain't with the school, Bert said with a nod in the direction of the ragged school a few streets away. She don't belong here, what I can tell. And she always goes the same way? Garrick asked. Bert gave a sharp nod. East, then south to the river, then east again. And then where? Then off our patch, Bert said, raising his thick, dark eyebrows. Now it was Garrick's turn to nod. There had been whispers of something hunting the streets across the eastern border of Garrick's territory. When he'd first heard the chatter, Garrick had dismissed it as a rumor started by the gang on the other side. But when you hear the same thing enough times, it's best not to ignore it. The woman was now directly across the street from them. Instinctively, the boys pressed themselves to their respective walls. This close, Garrett could see that she had pink cheeks and a round face that looked kind. Nothing like the pale, sharp-featured women who brayed out their windows and chased him and his boys away from their doorsteps with brooms. A lot of nerve to be walking through this patch alone. Nerve or stupidity? Booth lady, Garrett pronounced. Soup, soap, and salvation. Bert snorted. Yeah, don't get too close or she'll put you in the bath. Garrett tugged at the stained kerchief around his neck. He wouldn't have minded a bath or some soup either, but it wasn't worth all the Salvationists' thou shalt nots. He couldn't risk his boys catching religion and sprouting a conscience, not with winter coming on. A nice fat hen like that probably had a few feathers to pluck, though. Between her coin and her coat, Garrick and his boys could buy their own soup and baths. His stomach growled. They hadn't had a proper meal between them in days, and well, hello, what was that in her hand? She always had that bag with her, Garrick asked. It was a beat-up old Gladstone, the kind doctors carried. In Garrick's experience, bags like that always had something inside you could sell. Every time, Bert said. Garrick considered his mate. A lot of people underestimated Bert. He was a big bruiser of a kid, looked closer to 18 than the 14 Garrick knew he was. All that beef made a good disguise. Most people thought Bert had beef for brains too, but he was clever. If his tip panned out, Garrick would give him an extra share of the loot. Think she's got medicine in there? Garrick asked. Bert turned his clear blue eyes toward Garrick. The right kind of medicine could get a better price than a fine woolen coat, but that wasn't what it was in Bert's eyes. Bert was afraid. I don't know what she's got in there, Bert said, but whatever it is, it comes from that building on Shepherd Street. You know the one. Huh, Garrick said again, shifting his feet uneasily. That place on Shepherd Street had been empty for as long as he and his boys could remember. Someone had moved in, though, over the past 6 months. Folk who never showed their faces in the daytime, but at night brought the place to life with lights and shadows and sinister sounds. Nobody'd ever met them that Garrick knew. At the same time, everyone seemed to agree that they weren't the kind of folk you wanted to meet. If Miss Dogood were a man, Garrick might have approached his next move with caution. But she wasn't a man, and she wasn't a street-savvy East End girl with a fast right hook and a shiv in her boot. She was an intruder slumming for souls, and between her coat, her cash, and whatever was in that Gladstone, 5 minutes' work could feed Garrick and his boys for a week, Shepherd Street be damned. The steam whistle of a distant boat cut through his thoughts. Heavy gray clouds were rolling in, bringing with them the faint smell of rotten eggs. There'd be fog that night, thick and rank, but if they did this right, they'd be bedding down in their corner with full bellies for the first time in more than a week. Right, Garrick said. Gather up the boys and meet me by the old stairs. That is The Fiend in the Fog, coming on August 10th. Okay, now we have we have a question. We've got a couple of questions. All right, Sarah Helen Snow asks, Justine, you mentioned your interest in World War II. Have you ever thought of looking at World War I for inspiration?
Well, no. The reason is I lived in Germany and I was exposed to some of the more grisly details by Germans themselves. And so my contact both with German survivors and surviving Nazis, as well as surviving people from the concentration camps, made World War II especially vivid for me. So that is why I want to deal with that subject, is because I know real people. I also know real people from the resistance because I live now in Brussels. So World War I is history for me as it is for you, but World War II was not.
Right, thank you. All right, Hayden asks Justine also, really interested to hear how you present snow in your book. How did you get yourself into the snow zone, as it were? Snow feels like a difficult weather condition to describe uniquely without it becoming repetitive.
Well, I have to say that I spent much of my life in Los Angeles where there is no snow. So I craved it. I absolutely craved it. And when I first discovered it in Germany, I fell in love with the substance. And I counted it now and again. And I had very good experiences in snow. But when I went to Lapland, Finnish Lapland, it was right after a blizzard and the snow was chest high in many parts of the country. So it wasn't, I know I'm not answering your question, but it's just my own infatuation with snow meant that I had to find a way. I had to put my characters in that environment because that seemed almost as exciting as the drama that I was creating around them. Some people fantasize being on a beach in the tropics. I fantasize in being in the snow.
I'm from Los Angeles too, and I've had similar experience. Okay, Joan asks me, did you research Victorian England for your writing before you writing for your books, or were you a Victorian time period fan before you started writing? Both. I have always been a fan of anything set in that period, but I also try to research everything right down to blades of grass. One time I argued with an editor over the existence of a specific tree in a specific park in London in 1881, and I was right. And that is the level of research that I tried to do. Okay, here's a question for anybody who wants to answer. So anybody can jump right in here. During the writing process, do your characters ever run off in the wrong direction? And if so, how do you get them back on track? Anyone?
Well, my characters don't.
Oh.
They're well disciplined. I have them bound and gagged if they do.
I'm with Justine. Mine's the same. I plot so much in advance that there's no rope to go walking off.
I think I'm exactly the opposite. If they go off track, it's usually because I'm not looking at the story the right way, and so I follow them. Anybody else? If your characters get off track?
None if I can help it.
Okay, let me see. There's another question, and I want to put this one to Cathy, who also does a beautiful historical. How do you research to give an authentic feel to your books?
Yeah, I found that quite difficult with the question as to how much research to do, and how much kind of you want to exactly like get every single detail right versus trying to sort of not sacrifice good story and stuff. So I hope I've got balance right. Yeah, I found myself having to sort of Google underwear and stuff to make sure that those particular scenes were at least vaguely authentic, but not trying to get too involved in like exactly how things were fastened together, etc. So hopefully I've got the balance right, but I'm sure people will let me know.
Anybody else balancing research with story?
Well, I live in the countries that I write about, or I visit the countries I write about. So I was forced against my will to go to Venice one summer.
Oh, the sacrifices we make
to do it.
All right. Here's a question for everybody. What inspired you to write your book? Was it a real life event or a character you wanted to give a story to? What motivated you? Anybody? Aimée, what about you?
It's a good question. For this book, I guess there was a character in a soap opera, which was quite far from where I've taken my main character, Grayson. But I think I kind of carried her out of the soap opera and into my own universe. And as for real life events, I would say no, but maybe a real life person or several real life persons, because, well, obviously Grayson is going to become a priest in the Church of England. And I've met several women who are priests in the Church of England, and I guess it was kind of trying to maybe tell their story. And the ones I've met are also lesbians. So maybe it's somehow, I haven't asked them if my story was coherent with theirs, but it could have been.
Right. Lesley, what about you? What was your inspiration?
I'd enjoyed writing Starstruck, but I didn't really see it as a book book that I would do a sequel to. But an idea came along to follow the first one, which was a stalker, to this one being a fan who becomes the fanatic. And it was fun to get the older characters back and bring them into this one. It was just fun. I wanted them to be on a film set, because I think anything behind the scenes is just an absolute. It's just fantastic to watch them creating fantasy, and to see how they work. With everybody saying about having to check for Victorian clothing. I had to Google that because my characters time travel in their film, and they go back to Victoria, England. And my Googling, I found my best way to find out of any kind of Victorian clothing was to go on the Jack the Ripper tour site, where they gave you everything. So mine kind of deviated me to a little bit of a gruesome side, but they were very good telling me how to shoot stressed.
Excellent. Eden, what was your inspiration?
So last year we went to a place in Gloucestershire called Forest of Dean, and which has got lovely woods. It's really pretty. And obviously, while most people walk through there and think, oh, this is gorgeous, I was like, oh, I reckon a monster could hide in here quite easily. And so that was my inspiration. And I thought, yeah, I thought this could be pretty creepy if you tried. So yeah, that was mine.
Excellent. Okay, there's one remaining question. Hayden says, Amanda, I loved your reading. There was a fictional book that did well last year that presented social media in a negative light. I can't remember the name of it, within the genre of murder. How has having social media and influencers in your book changed the way you write, or has it had any effect?
I think because I write contemporary romance, social media and certainly social media influencers are part of society now for a lot of people, but you still have a lot of people who have no idea what they are. So I have family members who cannot wrap their head around the concept that someone can travel around the world and make huge amounts of money and have millions of people watching their videos, and many people do it. They do it as a job. So I just thought that was really interesting. I thought it was interesting to sort of bring that side of things in. And I think we all kind of have a touch point with social media, but we don't necessarily understand how it all works. So sort of like a backroom scene into how that works. I think a little bit like what Lesley was saying about being on the behind the scenes of a movie, sort of behind the scenes of social media, behind the scenes of how that all works. It just sort of it interests me. I watch a lot of social media influencers, not the life hacks and all that, you know, more travel vlogs and things. And I find it really interesting, and I find the sort of like monetization of that kind of job really fascinating. So yeah, I'll always put sort of more contemporary things in, because I think it's important to be showing, for my work, like the modern day sort of realities of work.
Okay, fabulous. Well, that was all of the questions that we've had, and we've had our wonderful readings. Thank you so much to everybody who read. I now have a new pile of books that I'm going to have to read, which is never a bad thing. Okay, thank you, everybody.